collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Following my trip to Brussels last week, this week's Cyprus News Digest is very much EU-based. Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini speaks plainly about Israel's settlements in the West Bank.
I re-expressed to the President what I often express publicly, also recently, the strong European Union opposition to the Israeli settlement policy and demolitions of Palestinian-owned structures. The European Union considers settlements to be illegal under international law, and this also has not changed in our policy.
We'll hear from the European Directorate General for the Environment about waste management.
But we see that there's also a lot of opportunities for Cyprus for treatment of their waste within the country. A good example is bio-waste and kitchen food waste that could be composted, if separately collected, could be composted and then used as fertilizers in people's gardens, parks, also for the agriculture, and that is much better than sending it to landfills.
And talk to Cypriot MEPs, among other things, about Brexit.
The tourism may be affected. The people of United Kingdom who live now in Cyprus, they have worries or concerns as far as I know.
And energy.
I believe that we need the support for the EU, not only politically, also financially, to have the infrastructure, how to bring the energy to Europe.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was in Brussels this week to meet the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini. Afterwards, she made this statement to the press.
I was particularly glad to welcome again my friend, President Abbas, to Brussels for a very fruitful and open exchange. Our views both on our bilateral relations. As you know, the European Union is a strong supporter to the Palestinian Authority, but also our views on the Middle East peace process in a time that requires a strong coordination, a strong unity, both of the parties, the region and the international community. I expressed to the President what I had the chance to express recently, both here in Brussels and in other parts of the world, that first of all, peace between Israel and Palestine is a top priority for the European Union, and it will remain a top priority in our political agenda. We remain committed to a negotiated two-state solution that remains for us the only viable way to end the conflict and all claims. Our EU policy on this has not changed. We recognise changes to the pre-67 borders, including with regard to Jerusalem, only when agreed by the parties. Our position on Jerusalem as future capital of both states has not changed, and we support Palestinian presence in East Jerusalem, both in political and financial terms. I re-expressed to the President what I often express publicly, also recently, the strong European Union opposition to the Israeli settlement policy and demolitions of Palestinian-owned structures. The European Union considers settlements to be illegal under international law, and this also has not changed in our policy. We also discussed the changing international political environment. We exchanged views and feedbacks we had, especially from our recent contacts with the new US administration. I was in Washington exactly 1 week ago. The President had an important telephone call with President Trump, and we, at least I can speak for the European Union, but I'm sure I reflect also the President's view in this respect. We welcome the fact that the US administration shows interest in solving the Middle East peace process, and we agreed to coordinate closely positions, including tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I will have the honour to be at the summit of the Arab League, where again we will discuss our common position between the European Union and the League of Arab States on many different issues, including the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. I would like to thank President Abbas not only for his visit here, but also for the constant channel of contacts we have, open, and an excellent cooperation. I would also like to thank him for his leadership and his commitment when it comes to non-violence, when it comes to difficult work he's doing on incitement, and also of maintaining the Palestinian people, and especially the Palestinian youth, committed to peace and to cooperation in the region. I think and I acknowledge that this is a challenging task, especially with the deteriorating economic and political situation, and I reassured him and his entire delegation of the fact that the European Union is and will continue to be at his side in trying to improve day by day the living conditions and the perspectives of his people.
The European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, speaking to the press after her meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Care for the environment is pretty high up the EU policy ranking, and during my visit to Brussels last week, I spoke to Małgorzata Gołębieska from the Directorate General for the Environment about waste policy. I asked her about the goals in waste management and also suggested that so far Cyprus hadn't done very well.
Well, our goal is to recycle more. On one hand, we want to increase the recycling rates. On the other hand, we have the waste hierarchy enshrined in the EU legislation, which says that we should start with waste prevention, so we should try to produce less waste. And then, if this is not possible, we should try to repair, reuse that waste, so that it's not waste, it carries on being a useful product, and recycle if that's not possible. And then other forms of recovery, like incineration and then, of course, disposal, that's the least desirable way to treat waste. Our legislation gives incentives to the member states to organize their system in such a way that they reduce the waste that goes to landfill, that they reuse, recycle more, and by this ensure that we use our resources, natural resources, more efficiently. That's good for the environment, that's also good for the economy.
And how are the member states in general meeting the targets? Because there have been some pretty high targets set, particularly for the states that have been doing well, and I think you've been a bit more lenient with those that possibly aren't.
We have mandatory recycling targets for municipal waste to be achieved by 2020. It's a 50% target, 50% recycling and composting. There are also specific targets in waste stream directives. So, for example, in the packaging waste directive, we have recovery recycling targets for packaging, the overall target, and then per materials, plastics, glass, metals. We also have landfill targets. We have targets also for batteries and end-of-life vehicles, waste, electric equipment. The performance of member states in these areas differs across the EU, and some are doing exceptionally well, overperforming when it comes to compliance with the recycling and recovery targets, and others are lagging behind. And unfortunately, the European Commission, DG Environment, we're trying to support the member states that are lagging behind by advising them, giving recommendations what to improve, how to improve. There's best practice available from those member states that achieved good progress in the recent years. So these countries can learn from what has worked in these member states and implement that. There are EU funds available to build the necessary infrastructure. So there's a lot we can do to help these member states, and that's what we're doing, so that they actually reach the targets, that they implement what's in EU legislation that they signed up to. But we have different successful rates.
It strikes me that, Cyprus being an island, a bit like Malta, is a special case in one sense, because everything is there. We're small, it should be easy, but then the amounts of waste make some solutions totally unviable.
It's true that some solutions might not be economically viable for a small area such as Cyprus. Building a big incinerator might not be efficient, and that's definitely not what we would recommend. Some of the materials, collected waste, will have to be shipped to other countries for processing, but this is happening already today. But we see that there's also a lot of opportunities for Cyprus for treatment of their waste within the country. A good example is bio-waste and kitchen food waste that could be composted, if separately collected, could be composted and then used as fertilizers in people's gardens, parks, also for the agriculture, and that is much better than sending it to landfills. Also, there are some materials where it would be economically viable, like glass or plastics or even metals. These are expensive resources that need to be imported. Nothing of this kind is being extracted in Cyprus. So there are still.
So you're saying there is room for the heavy industry that would actually process these items after they were collected for recycling?
I think there is some room, but of course it's up to the economic operators to decide. There are markets in the EU, so goods get shipped to Cyprus, and then these materials can then be taken and brought to the mainland of Europe. So there are opportunities, there are ways to deal with it, but of course we appreciate that it's more difficult maybe for isolated areas than European mainland.
And what about the take-up in Cyprus of the EU funding that you mentioned? Are we making full use of that?
For the time being, not necessarily. This is linked to, the EU funding in the area of waste is linked to some conditionalities. It's called ex-ante conditionalities. There are 4 conditions that need to be met by a member state to receive that funding. And unfortunately, Cyprus, for the time being, is not meeting these conditions. So the access to funding is blocked, with the exception of so-called safe projects. So projects where we know that they will lead to good outcome, such as waste prevention or reuse, recycling. There we would not block the funding. But for any heavier infrastructure in the area of waste treatment, especially residual waste, for the time being that's blocked. So of course Cyprus is not making full use of it. But we're hoping that soon these conditions will be met. That's mostly linked to requirement on the national authorities, the requirements that need to be met. So once these conditions are fulfilled, then Cyprus will have access to all these funds.
Margoceta Goyembiaska of the Directorate General for the Environment at the European Commission.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the 4th series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
The European Union is celebrating the anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, and at the same time it's looking at what's going to happen with Brexit. It's the plus and the minus, in a sense, of what has become known as the European bloc. One of Cyprus MEPs is Dagis Hagiorgiou. He joins us now to talk about, well, those pluses and minuses. First of all, I think at the moment it's the Brexit negotiations that you've been told will be triggered on the 29th of March. So what happens next with that?
I think that nobody knows really. I believe also that even Mrs. May does not know what is going to happen. But let's say that the negotiations will go on successfully, meaning Brexit at the very end. In that case, I believe that this would be a difficult moment for the Britons and for European Union, both of them. Still, I believe that it will be more difficult for the people of the United Kingdom. I think that they will face economical problems, which they don't face right now at the beginning of this procedure. Secondly, they may face a new referendum in Scotland to escape, let's say so, from Great Britain, United Kingdom. And I don't know what may happen for Ireland. So many problems I see that they will come up for United Kingdom.
What's the feeling in the European Parliament about this? Because some countries have very strong trade ties with the UK. The Germans won't want not to be able to sell their cars without tariffs, for example. There are fears that countries which are not such great trade partners will want to make sure there are punitive measures in place to try and prevent other countries thinking of pressing the button too. On the other hand, that could backfire very badly on the main block of European trade, couldn't it?
Yeah, that's why I said at the beginning that nobody knows right now what is going to happen. And let me tell you that during this procedure of 18 months, as far as I remember, for the way out procedure, any country or every country in the European Union has the right to put veto on any chapter of the negotiations.
So it could take a lot longer than 2 years.
Let me remind you that what was the country which left Greenland years ago? They were discussing only about fishes, and they spent 3 years. So now they have thousands of fishes to talk about. And yes, you are right that most probably we will need more than 2 years for sure.
And what about the impact on Cyprus? And then the
parliaments have to decide that they agree, and the governments. So it's a very, very difficult task. So for Cyprus, yes, we have interest about that. The tourism may be affected. The people of United Kingdom who live now in Cyprus, they have worries or concerns as far as I know. Thirdly, there is the issue of the bases in Cyprus. Some politicians say, I don't want to repeat that, I'm just telling you that some politicians refer to that, saying that yes, we can even think about that during the negotiations as Cyprus towards the United Kingdom. So there are, yes, things which the Cypriots we have to be concerned about. Yeah.
Let's talk more positively now about the celebration of the Treaty of Rome, the anniversary of the founding of the European Union. 60 years on, how do you view the Union? Does it have a future?
I am not one of those who believe that this building, let's put it that way, will be demolished. No, I don't believe that. But I do believe that for years, for sure around 10 years, as I can foresee, if I can foresee, we will go on as we go recently, without the ability to give to the people a job, good health system, education, and so on. But I don't see that European Union will be demolished or will be fade away.
But there has to be a look at how it proceeds into the future.
But we have to, thinking about the 60 years, we have to go back to see how the people who had this first idea 60 years ago, how were they thinking about that? And we have to go back to these basic ideas.
But things have changed since then, and we're talking about so many more countries in the Union, with more queuing up possibly to join, that the goalposts have moved away down the football field. We have to surely take a new look at what is needed to make this a success in the coming 50, 60 years?
There is no other way than to increase the level of our economy. There is no other way. As I already said, to give to the people the possibility to have a good work with a good salary, to give to the Europeans a good health system and good education. It's a very difficult task, but this is the only way to persuade the people to believe in this European idea. And of course I want to see a European Union who does not take place in wars around the planet, who support people in Africa, in Asia, in Middle East, where the people really suffer. And sometimes I believe that the European Union has to be tough against governments who break these fundamental principles of the humanity, meaning Turkey, for example. I believe that the European Union can be a bit more tough against Mr. Erdogan, who I think broke any human right in his country.
But who is hosting literally hundreds of thousands of refugees that Europe wants to keep out of Europe. So it's a very tricky line to follow, isn't it?
That's why European Union feels that she can't confront him, because exactly of that. But this is a blackmail, isn't it? So we have to wait. They have to find a way out. And maybe a way out means a way in for these refugees.
Well, there's a thought for you. That's our MEP Tagis Hagiorgiou talking to me in Brussels last week.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Cyprus' former energy minister and now member of the European Parliament, Neoklis Silikiodis, spoke to environmental NGOs in Brussels last week. I asked him, bearing in mind the importance that the EU attaches to energy security, what role, if any, Cyprus could play since huge amounts of hydrocarbons had been found in Israeli and Egyptian waters.
All of my contribution as a shadow rapporteur in the report for Energy Union, for the energy security, always I mention the importance for European energy security, the importance of the East Med resources. And I believe Cyprus play one key role in this area, and I believe that we need the support for the EU, not only politically, also financially, to have the infrastructure, how to bring the energy to Europe. Okay, I can understand the solution of the Cyprus problem. They can play a key role how to use the energy.
Well, if there is a solution, then it's logical that Turkey will be used as the conduit, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think we can be one cooperation with the countries of the region. Without the Cyprus issue, I believe it's difficult to use these energy resources, because the alternative, how to bring to Europe, is too expensive.
Yeah.
And for the other sides, I'm afraid that many companies, they invest now, they make exploitation, they make drilling, they make research, but if you have to invest to exploit the gas, to use the gas, to bring in the market, you need to invest $1 billion of euro.
And you need the price of gas to go up.
Of course, and for the other sides, many companies, I'm afraid, they cannot invest in one area who is instability, political instability. That is because I believe they go together also with, and I hope that we can have one successful by the negotiation for the solution of the Cyprus problem.
Can we also speak briefly about the illegal bird trapping that's been going on? It's again in the news. It gives Cyprus such an appalling name abroad. It affects tourism arrivals. It affects a lot of things. What can be done, do you think, about this illegal bird trapping and the fact that for so many years the police really do seem, to a large extent, to turn a blind eye particularly to the restaurants that serve ambelaboulia. And then we have certain politicians on the island who actually stand for Parliament on the basis of supporting the illegal trapping.
Yeah,
What's to be done?
Yeah, first of all, I think we have to implement all the European legislative, the European directives. And to be honest to say, you have to be more strict what happens with in some areas. And, okay, for one side you have to mention what is happening in the British bases, in the Kenya, example, is not under control of the Cyprus government. And you have to raise this issue also in the European level. Also in publicly. I read one article a few weeks ago about this, what happened. And the other, you have to be more strict in some areas. Because many times they come in the media about some cases of citizens. But the big problem is by the big deal for some of groups, yeah? And you have right, you have to see what happens in some areas in the restaurants.
Can the EU play a role in that? Can you, as an MEP, have any impact on, for example, your former colleagues in the Cyprus Parliament?
Then okay, but about them, what they say, the members of the national parliament is different, but I think they have the legislation, the European Union. Many times the European Union...
It's just not implemented.
Yeah, no. Many times they send it, okay, but sometimes the Commission, because the power is by the Commission or by the Parliament will come raise the issue. But the Commission, they have the key, the instrument, how to press more the Cyprus government. I mean, to implement all the directives of the EU legislation in the issue of the bird life, of the birds, how to protect the birds. So for us, I think the only role we can play is to bring this in front of the European institutional bodies or what happens.
Or ask the Commission a question.
Especially, I think that to do that what happens in the Kenya area. And now is, can I say, is a good time because now we discuss in the European Parliament about Brexit.
Former Cyprus Energy Minister and now Member of the European Parliament, Neoklis Silikiotis, speaking to me in Brussels last week.
Get in touch with the Cyprus News Digest by emailing cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
And finally, a couple of other stories making the news this week. Well, as regards the stalled Cyprus problem negotiations, the UN Special Advisor, Espen Barth Ida, is going to host a dinner for the two leaders, that's President Nikos Anastasiadis and the Turkish Cypriot leader Mustafa Akinci, on Sunday. The UN has been trying to restart the stalled negotiations for several weeks, but it really is up to the two leaders. Perhaps over dinner they can overcome some of the problems. And let's finish with some good news. Road fatalities in Cyprus decreased by 23% between 2010 and 2016. That's according to a report issued by the European Commission on road safety. Well, it could be, of course, that we've exceeded the EU average because we had such high road fatalities. But nevertheless, good news on road safety. In 2011, by the way, the Commission said more than 30,000 people died on European Union roads, the equivalent, they said, of a medium town. Incidentally, the relevant ministry here in Cyprus is planning to introduce road safety lessons in secondary schools. The ministry is also in the process of preparing legislative amendments to modernise the penalties for road accidents. Stringent penalties will include the immediate suspension of driving licences if found guilty of driving under the influence, impounding speeding cars and increasing fines for using mobile phones at the wheel or not wearing a seatbelt. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.